Hi, I'm Kinkas and I'm a synth DIY guy. Welcome to today's video, which is number 7, I think. 7 in the series of videos about using the Bullfrog XL synthesizer to teach synthesis and sound design. And today's video is going to be about the utility modules, which are just basic components like building blocks for certain things that you might need to accomplish, which are not the main modules. So the main modules are the VCO, the VCF, the VCA, the 2 envelope generators, the sample and hold, and the mixer. The mixer, we didn't do a video about it because basically it's just an extension of the VCO. It's where you determine the volume of the waveforms that are being generated by the VCO, and you can add the noise to that, which is not really coming from the VCO, but in fact, you know, it's just a mixer. We don't need a full video about the mixer. We might consider it our first utility module actually and talk about it a little bit. Basically, these are 3 attenuators that you can use for different things than what it says right here. If you stick something into the input of the sine attenuator, for example, it no longer is the sine. It'll now be an attenuator for whatever source you've plugged into this input, and you can do the same with all 3. So one example would be to take the pulse output of the oscillator and send it to the divider. Now the divider can be our second utility module for this video, right? What the divider does is exactly what the name says, it divides. So if you send it pulses, like clock pulses, the half one will send you a pulse at every 2. So every second pulse, it'll send you a pulse out of here. And by 4, well, it'll be at every 4th pulse, 8 at every 8th, and 16 at every 16th. So if I plug in our pulse wave, you can already see the LEDs, how, you know, the first one is fast, second one is a little slower, third one is even slower, and the fourth one is even slower than that. And if we now send our mix output to the filter, and then from the filter to the VCA, so we can hear something, and we'll take our dry output of the VCA straight to the oscilloscope and the audio interface. And we can now this is our pulse that we're hearing, right? As you can see, I have the volume control for that here, and this is the sine and noise. But if I take outputs from the divider, right, let's turn the pulse back up. If I take the half one, and put it in this input, instead of getting the sine wave here, we're going to get a pulse an octave lower. You hear that? 1 octave lower. And then I can take the by 4 division by 4, send it to the noise attenuator over here, and that's going to be 1 octave lower still, right? In fact, if I turn up you can really hear it now, right? Like this is the pure pulse wave. Let's make it a square. We'll put the pulse shape in the middle here. And as I turn up, here we get an octave below, and here we get an octave below that. And that's actually the principle behind the organ module. That's a card that goes up here, right? And you can see on the oscilloscope how those octaves are adding together, right? Here's the main one. Let's get some resonance out of there and filter it a little bit so it's not so harsh. And here's the octave below, 2 octaves below. Right? So the mixer, beyond just mixing the outputs as they're labeled, can also be used just as a general mixer with whatever signals you happen to plug into those inputs. Now, the outputs, if I plug a cable into the output of this attenuator here, this is octave 1. I can then route this to something else. They're not only mixing these 3 signals together, but they also act as individual attenuators that you can use, that beyond sending to the mix output have their individual outputs as well, that you can use to send it to other destinations. This is utility number 1, the mixer. Utility number 2 is the divider, and we've just seen what it can do. With audio, what it does is it generates, since an octave, what are octaves? Octaves are multiplying a frequency by 2 or dividing it by 2, right? And you get the same note. So if you take a note, that's 440 hertz, right? You multiply it by 2, 880 hertz are 1 octave higher, are the same A note. They're still an A note, but they're an octave higher, and then you multiply that by 2 and you get what, 16, well, you know, whatever 880 times 2 is. Every octave is double the previous octave, or every octave below is half the octave above it, right? So a divider that's dividing in binary numbers like this, 2, 4, 8, and 16, is just going to give you different octaves if you use it with an audio rate source, such as the pulse wave of the oscillator. However, if you want to use it with a clock, then you can use these for rhythms, right? So let's do something like that. We'll take the rate from the pulse output from the sample and hold here. We can always think of this rate knob in the sample and hold as a square wave LFO that's available for whatever we might need to use it for. So even if you don't use the rest of the sample and hold module, you can still use this as just a clock source, right? So let's take that pulse out right there, and now we can really see, right? You can really see how at each 2 pulses on the first one, you get 1 on the second one. At each 2 of the second one, you get 1 on the third one. And each 2 of the third one, you get 1 on the fourth one, right? And these can be used for rhythms. We've already been using our third utility of today's video is the splitter. The splitter, that's all it does. It splits a signal so you can send the same signal to multiple destinations, right? And you have 2 splitters that can act as one big one. One splitter, you have the input, you have the little signal here, and then these 2 are outputs. So I can send one signal to 2 destinations, right? And if I plug something to the second splitter input, then that's the end of the first splitter, and this one becomes a second splitter. But if I don't have anything plugged into this input right here, this input is normal to the first splitter. So that means I can split this signal into 4 destinations. I have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So all 4 outputs of both splitters are going to be copies, exact copies of the same input, right? But right now, what we want to do, we're using the second splitter to split the signal between the oscilloscope and the audio interface so that you can see and hear what we're doing, right? And we'll use the first one to split our pulse, right? So that it can go to the divider, but we also have that original pulse available right there. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a kick drum sound, right? How am I going to create a kick drum sound? So all the volumes are down on the mixer. We're not hearing anything right now. And I'm going to put the resonance all the way high on the filter. And that's going to turn it into a sine wave oscillator, right? And if I put that into this input here and turn it up, I start to hear that sine wave. Right? Now, if I take our pulse, which is in the splitter here, we still have an output available for the pulse, and we trigger the first envelope generator, we can make a kind of a kick drum by sending the envelope generator output to CV input of the filter. See? In fact, instead of using the main pulse here, we want the kick to be once in a while, not at every beat. We're going to use one of the divisions, so maybe 8 here. Right now we're getting this right? And we can use the main pulse to create a hi-hat. So how do we do a hi-hat? Quick hi-hat in this system. Well, we'll take the noise output and we'll plug it into the audio input of the VCA. We'll turn the offset down. And we'll take the dry output of the VCA and put it into another input of our mixer, right? And then we'll send the other envelope generator to a CV input of the VCA, and we'll trigger that envelope generator with the main pulse from the sample and hold module right out of the splitter, second output of the splitter here, right? So one of the output of the splitter going to the divider, and that's giving us our by 8 division. And our main pulse is going to trigger right there. That's too loud, right? So we can turn that down and turn up. So now we have two different rhythms happening, right? We can use any of these outputs for that kick drum, right? Doom, 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 right? Now if we had another VCA and another envelope generator, we could use another one of these outputs and do like a snare, maybe, you know, a snare at every 8th division of the clock. Pa, 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 or a 16th. So yeah, that's what the divider is for. So we've looked at the divider utility both in audio rate, where we can use it to have octaves, to generate octaves, lower octaves from whatever we plug it into the input. By 2 is 1 octave below, by 4, 2, by 8 is 3, and by 16 is 4 octaves below. But we can also use it to generate divisions of the rhythmic clock, right? So you send the clock, and you can get a pulse at every 2 clock pulses, a pulse at every 4, a pulse at every 8, and a pulse at every 16. Those are the main uses of the divider. I'm sure somebody will know something clever to do with it beyond what I've just mentioned, but that's basically it. So now, utilities. We've talked about the mixer, we've talked about the splitter, we've talked about the divider. Now there are two more utilities in the synth, which are the attenuverter and the slew. The attenuverter is very simple. Basically, we've already seen attenuators. Even the mixer knobs are attenuators. That's what they do. They attenuate the signal. So when you have it all the way up, you're not attenuating anything. As you turn it down, you're attenuating. And if you attenuate all the way, you get nothing, right? You get ground or 0 volts, and you don't hear anything. Now the attenuverter, it's got that verter part of it, right? What does it do? It inverts the signal as well, right? So a positive going signal can become a negative going signal. So this is very useful because not only can you determine the amplitude of a signal, you can also determine its direction. Why don't we have a look? Let's plug in the envelope generator output, right? So this output right here, we're gonna plug it straight into the attenuverter, and we're gonna look at that in the oscilloscope, right? So let's make it faster. Which one am I using? This one? We're gonna put it in loop and make it fast. We don't need the gate anymore. I'll put it in loop, right? And we can kind of hear it as a low note. We can see now in the oscilloscope how what we're hearing are basically continuous spikes coming out of the envelope generator, where we have a fast attack and a slowish release, right? We can make the attack a little slower, and then you get more of that shark fin kind of shape, or wave, like ocean wave kind of shape, right? And you can bring in the release a little bit. And we can hear that low droning note because it's fast enough to be audible as a note. It's audio rate, right? Okay, so now if I turn up the level, see right now we're very close to 0. If I turn up the level, in fact, let's turn down the oscilloscope amplitude so we can actually see how that gets both louder and bigger on the oscilloscope. So, and when I hit 0, at 0 exactly, you get silence and you get a flat line. Now watch what happens as I turn the attenuverter towards counterclockwise, towards the left, right? So you've seen that our shark fins are above the line, right? So they're positive voltages. It's a voltage that goes positive and comes back to 0. Now as I approach the middle, we get 0 and we get a flat line and no sound. And then if I keep going, look at that. Our shark fins or waves are now on the bottom part of the oscilloscope, which reflects negative voltages. So these are actually literally negative voltage, like -1 volt, -2, -3, whatnot. That can be very useful, you know. Sometimes that's what you want. You want a negative envelope instead of a positive going envelope, right? You have the bipolar output there, but maybe you don't want bipolar. You want specifically a negative going envelope generator for some reason, like you have an idea for a patch that requires that, well, here you have your attenuverter for that, right? You can use it, for example, to create kind of a mirror sequence, right? So if I use my sample and hold module to create a random sequence, and I can control my VCO with that, I can then use the VCF as another oscillator, right? Turn the resonance all the way up, and then invert the same output from the sample and hold using the splitter, right? I'll use the splitter. I'll send one output directly to the VCO, and another output to the attenuverter, invert it, and send that to the filter, and then you get another sequence that's going down when the first one goes up. So they like move together, but in opposing directions, right? So in fact, why don't we quickly do that patch? All right, so let's see how quickly I can patch this. We're just going to take the sine output. It's already going to be available here. We're going to take this mix out to the splitter so we can hear, right? Let's turn that down a little bit for now. And we're going to take the filter output and put it in the second input of the mixer here. And we'll more or less match the note, right? Now we'll take the noise output to the sample and hold CV input, and we'll take and we're in free, so it's using the internal clock, right? And we'll take the sample and hold output and put it on our first splitter here, and we'll send one splitter output to the volt per octave input of the VCO. And now we'll take the other splitter output and send that to the attenuverter. Invert it completely, so let's turn it all the way counterclockwise. So that way it's the same amplitude but inverted. And then we'll take that output and send it to the CV input of the filter. So now when one goes down, the other one goes up. Now we can play around with the frequencies to get like some chords or stuff. So they're moving together, but in opposing directions, right? Oscillator, blue oscillator goes, when it goes down, the VCF goes up, and vice versa. So this is a duo random sequence here now, right? All right, so that's the attenuverter. That's one reason to use it. You can also use it to invert LFO, for example. So let's say you have the envelope generator number 1 acting as an LFO, and that's affecting something, and you want something else, even for stereo. That's interesting. For example, I can send the filter output to left speaker and the VCA output to the right speaker, and then use the envelope generator to open and close the VCA, right, on one ear, and then invert it and send the inverted version of the LFO to the filter so that it opens when the VCA closes, the filter opens, and then you get this auto pan kind of effect. So that's a good exercise. That's something to try. Try creating an auto pan. Also, what I've done already, like this random sequence in 2 voices, that's another exercise that's good to use to learn the attenuverter, right? Basically, it's an attenuator that also inverts the signal. And now the last of our utility modules, the Slew. What does the Slew do? Well, you might have heard of the word portamento or the word glide as applied to synthesis. That's just, it slows down a change, right? So, for example, if I use a keyboard and I go from one note to another, if I don't use a Slew, that note will change immediately. If I use the Slew, it'll glide up to or down to the next note. So it's a way to smoothen very fast transitions. In fact, you can turn a square wave into a sine wave by doing this, right? You can take the pulse output of our sample and hold, and we can turn that into kind of a sinusoid LFO by just making, instead of it being immediate state changes from high to low, high to low, high to low, it'll glide to high and glide to low. So let's try that. Let's pull all the cables out. The first thing is we're just going to take the sine output here and just plug it in to the splitter. And we're going to take the keyboard, the pitch output of the keyboard, into 1 volt per octave here. See how the keyboard changes immediately the note, right? So what happens if I use the Slew, right? So I'm going to plug the keyboard into the Slew now, and the Slew generator. And right now, just in the interest of being quick and efficient, I'm not doing the main patch. I'm not using filter or VCA or anything. This is just to example. Now, hear how it glides, and I can change the time and make it glide slower. So with a fast slew time, you can't even tell there's a slew, right? Changes immediately. With a slow, so this slew isn't super slow. There are slews that go way slower, give you more portamento time, more glide. But this one already sounds pretty cool. So it gives you portamento basically. Now let's try the other thing, the other idea, which was like if I take the pulse out here and just send it to the FM input here. See how it's a immediate change, up, down, up, down, up, 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 right? Now if I slew it, I can turn it into a different kind of an LFO shape that isn't the square, something smoother. So again, if I turn the slew all the way down, it's immediate change. No, from low to high. And if I make the slew slow, then you get like that. So that's a way to actually change the pulse LFO from our sample and hold module into a more sinusoidal kind of an LFO that can be useful for this kind of siren sounds, right? So for example, if you're using the envelope generators already for something else and you need a third LFO but you want a square LFO, you can use the slew to make a kind of a sine LFO, right? Is it a sine? Let's have a look. Let's have a look at the signal. Here we go. Look at that shape. See, that's almost like a triangle, right? It's kind of a it's kind of a slanted triangle. If I turn the slew time down, it becomes a square again. See, so that's the pulse, just a raw pulse with fast slew time. And as I turn it to a slow slew time, it becomes a triangular kind of an LFO, which can be super useful too. So don't think that with this synth you only get a pulse LFO. You do get a triangle LFO as well. All you have to do is use the slew, right? And that concludes today's video. That's all the utilities: mixer, divider, splitter, attenuverter, slew generator. Yeah, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the last video, which is going to be about the expansion cards that you get with the Bullfrog products. All right, see you soon. Stay noisy.